The boy in room 117 the hospital was quiet that afternoon. The kind of heavy silence that lingers between walls that have seen too much pain and too many prayers. Rain tapped softly against the wide windows of St. Mary's Children's Ward, and somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped steadily, like a small heartbeat fighting to keep going. Sandra Bullock had always avoided hospitals when she could. They reminded her of loss, of her father's slow battle with illness, of the nights spent holding a hand that grew weaker with every breath. But today was different. Today, she was here for a charity visit, a promise she had made months ago to spend time with children fighting cancer. She walked through the long corridor with a bouquet of bright balloons in one hand and a box of small stuffed animals in the other. The nurses smiled when they saw her, and a few parents wiped away tears as she spoke gently to their children, her voice soft and full of warmth. But something felt different as she neared the last room at the end of the hall, room 217. There was no laughter there, no soft music, no family members chatting beside the bed, just a small boy staring silently out the window, his thin frame barely visible beneath the hospital blankets. "That's Liam," the nurse whispered beside her. "He's 8, stage for leukemia. His mom works 2 jobs and still tries to be here every night. But lately," she hesitated, "lately, he doesn't talk to anyone, not even the doctors." Sandra's heart tightened. She pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside. Liam didn't turn around when she entered. His head was shaved, his skin pale, and his eyes too old for his age stared blankly at the rain outside. "Hey," Sandra said softly, trying to sound cheerful. "I brought some company." No answer. "I have balloons," she added, holding them up. "They're all yours if you want them." Still nothing. Not even a glance. She placed them gently beside his bed and sat down in the chair next to him. "You know," she continued, "when I was your age, I used to hate hospitals. I thought they were boring. But then I realized they're also full of heroes. Not the kind you see in movies, the real kind. Kids like you." Liam blinked but didn't speak. "The nurses told me you love movies," she said after a moment. "Me too. They're like magic, aren't they? You can go anywhere, be anyone. They're not real," Liam said suddenly, his voice small but sharp. "What's not real?" "Heroes," he whispered. "They always save everyone. But no one can save me." The words cut deeper than any silence. Sandra felt her throat tighten. How do you answer that? How do you comfort a child who already believes the world has stopped fighting for him? "Sometimes," she said gently, "saving doesn't mean curing. Sometimes it means showing up, being there, reminding someone they're not alone." Liam didn't respond, but for the first time, he looked at her, just a small glance, but it was enough. That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. Liam's words echoed in her head over and over again. No one can save me, Doc. She had seen sadness before. She had seen pain. But there was something different about this boy, something heavy and hollow, as if hope itself had already walked out of his room. She wanted to do more. She needed to do more, and so, without really knowing why, she picked up her phone and sent a message to someone she trusted more than almost anyone. "There's a boy. He needs hope. I think you're the only one who can help." The reply came just 3 minutes later. "Tell me where." 2 days later, the hospital staff buzzed with whispers. Cameras were banned, reporters weren't allowed, but the news had already spread. Keanu Reeves was here. He walked down the hallway quietly, without an entourage, without bodyguards. No sunglasses, no hat to hide his face. Just Keanu, hands in his pockets, expression soft, eyes filled with the same calm kindness that had always defined him. "Thank you for coming," Sandra said when he reached her. "You said someone needed hope." He replied simply, "I brought what I could." They stood outside room 117 for a moment before stepping in. Liam was in bed again, staring out the window as usual. But this time, when the door opened, he turned and his eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. Keanu smiled. "Hey, kid. I heard you're in the movies." Liam blinked, stunned. You're him. Well, I hope I'm still me," Keanu said with a small laugh as he pulled up a chair. "But yeah, I do make a few movies now and then." Liam stared, speechless. "So," Keanu said, leaning forward, "which one's your favorite?" "John Wick," Liam whispered. "But my mom says I'm too young to watch it." Keanu grinned. "Your mom's probably right. But maybe we can watch something together that's a little less violent." And just like that, something changed. Liam, the boy who hadn't spoken in weeks, was laughing, smiling, alive. Keanu came back the next day, and the next. Sometimes he brought movies. Sometimes he brought stories from film sets. Sometimes he just sat quietly, listening to Liam talk about superheroes, video games, and his dreams of one day becoming a filmmaker. And every time, Sandra watched from the doorway with tears in her eyes, because something she thought was gone, something small and fragile, was growing again in that hospital room. Hope, he's different with you, the nurse whispered one afternoon. He's eating again, talking again. It's like he wants to fight now. It's not me, Keanu said softly. It's him. He just needed someone to remind him he's still worth fighting for. Weeks passed. Liam's condition didn't magically improve. The treatments were still painful, the prognosis still uncertain. But something inside him was stronger now, or will it keep going, to try, to live. And then, one rainy afternoon, he looked at Keanu with a determined expression. Do you think heroes are real? He asked. Keanu thought for a moment. Yeah, he said finally, but not the kind who fly or shoot lasers. The real heroes are the ones who keep going, even when it hurts. The ones who don't give up. Liam's lips curved into a small, brave smile. Then maybe I can be one. Keanu's voice softened. Kid, you already are, but just as everything seemed to be getting better, a sudden twist shattered the fragile peace. One morning, when Sandra arrived at the hospital, Liam's bed was empty. His machines were gone. His nameplate was missing. Panic clawed at her chest. She ran to the nurse's station, breathless. Where's Liam? She demanded. The nurse's expression was grim. He was moved to intensive care overnight. There were complications. Her heart dropped. Keanu arrived minutes later, the same worry etched across his face. They rushed to the ICU together, neither speaking, both terrified of what they might find, because for the first time since they had met Liam, it felt like hope might not be enough, and neither of them was ready to lose the boy who had taught them more about courage than they had ever known. The fight for tomorrow's hall outside the intensive care unit felt colder than the rest of the hospital. The lights were brighter, the air sharper, and the silence heavier, the kind of silence that carried fear in every breath. Sandra stood by the window, her hands shaking as she stared through the glass into Liam's room. He was barely recognizable. The boy who had been smiling and laughing just days ago now lay unconscious. Tubes and wires surrounding his small body. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the room, each sound a reminder that he was still fighting. But only just. Keanu stood beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the boy who had changed something inside them both. What happened? Sandra asked the nurse, her voice trembling. His body isn't responding well to the new treatment. The nurse explained gently. He developed an infection overnight. His immune system is weak, but the doctors are doing everything they can. Will he wake up? Sandra whispered. We don't know yet. It was the answer she had dreaded. The hours that followed felt endless. Keanu and Sandra sat side by side in the waiting area, speaking very little. Every few minutes, Sandra would stand and pace, her eyes flicking toward the ICU doors. Keanu stayed still, his mind replaying every moment he had spent with Liam, every laugh, every question, every spark of hope. This isn't fair, Sandra said suddenly, her voice breaking. He's just a kid. He hasn't even lived yet. Life isn't fair, Keanu replied softly. But that's why we fight harder for moments like this. And what if we lose him? Then we make sure he never feels alone. Not for a second. Sandra wiped away tears. You always sound so sure. I'm not, he admitted. But I know this. Hope is the only thing that keeps people alive long enough to be saved. We have to hold on to it, even when it hurts. Days passed. Liam remained unconscious, his tiny chest rising and falling with the help of a machine. Doctors adjusted medications, nurses worked tirelessly, but there was little change, and yet, neither Keanu nor Sandra left. They read stories by his bedside. They talked to him as if he could hear them. Keanu even brought a small projector one night and played Liam's favorite movies on the wall, classics, animated films, superhero adventures. You said heroes aren't real, Keanu whispered, sitting by the bed. But I think you're proving us all wrong. Sandra watched him, her heart aching and swelling all at once. She had always known Keanu was kind. The world knew that. But seeing him here, day after day, pouring his heart into a boy he barely knew, it was different. This wasn't kindness for the cameras. This was humanity at its purest. And it was changing her. One evening, after another long day of waiting, A doctor approached them with cautious eyes. "He's stable," the doctor said, "but we're running out of options. The next step is an experimental treatment. High risk, but it might give him a chance. Do it." Sandra said immediately his mother will need to consent. The doctor replied, "We've been trying to reach her." Keanu frowned. "She hasn't been here?" "She's trying," the nurse explained. "She works nights and days just to afford transportation and bills. She's doing her best." That night, Sandra sat alone in her car, thinking about those words. She's doing her best. She had grown up watching her own mother struggle. 2 jobs, sleepless nights, endless sacrifices. And now another mother was fighting the same battle, all while her son lay between life and death. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "What are you doing?" Keanu asked when she returned. "I'm paying for everything," she said simply. "His treatment, his transport, his mother's time off work, all of it. She deserves to be by his side." "You don't have to." "I know," she interrupted, "but I want to." He looked at her for a long moment and then nodded. "Then I'll do it with you." And just like that, they formed a quiet pact, not just to fight for Liam's life, but to make sure he never fought alone. Liam's mother, Maria, arrived at the hospital the next morning. She was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling from lack of sleep. But when she saw Sandra and Keanu waiting for her, something inside her broke. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, we did," Sandra said gently. "Because no one should go through this alone." Maria signed the consent forms, and the treatment began that afternoon. It was risky, a powerful combination of therapies designed to attack the cancer aggressively. There were no guarantees, but for the first time in weeks, hope felt real again. The next days were some of the hardest. Liam's body reacted strongly: fever, nausea, pain. There were moments when the monitors blared alarms, moments when doctors rushed in and the world seemed to hold its breath. But slowly, painfully, his body began to fight back. On the 5th night, Keanu sat by his bed, reading a story about a knight who never gave up on his quest, no matter how many dragons he faced. Halfway through a sentence, he felt a small movement. Liam's fingers twitched. "Sandra," Keanu whispered, his heart leaping. "Come here. Look." They both leaned in. Liam's hand moved again, this time deliberately, and then, with tremendous effort, his eyelids fluttered open. "Hey, kid," Keanu said softly, his voice breaking into a smile. "Welcome back." Liam's lips parted. "Did I win?" "Not yet," Sandra whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But you're fighting harder than anyone I've ever met." A tiny smile formed on his pale face. "I told you, I want to be a hero." And in that moment, they all knew. He already was. The news of Liam's progress spread quietly through the hospital. Nurses stopped by just to check on him. Doctors called it a small miracle. And yet, the battle was far from over. The treatment had bought him time, but it wasn't a cure. The next months would decide everything, but something had shifted. Liam was no longer just a patient. He was a fighter, and behind him stood a small, unlikely family, a devoted mother, a compassionate actress, and a quiet actor whose kindness had reignited a boy's will to live. One rainy evening, as they sat by his bed watching the storm outside, Liam turned to Keanu with a question that caught him off guard. "Why do you come here every day?" Keanu thought for a moment. "Because I believe people need to show up for each other. The world can be cruel, but we can choose to be kind, even if we don't know them." "Especially then," Keanu said, "because that's when kindness matters most." Liam was silent for a while. Then he reached out, his small hand gripping Keanu's. "Then you're my hero," he whispered. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't pride or satisfaction. It was deeper than that. It was purpose. But just as the light began to return, the storm came back harder. One night, while Keanu and Sandra were home, the hospital called. Liam's condition had taken a sudden turn. The infection was back, stronger, more dangerous, threatening everything they had fought for. The doctors were doing everything they could, but this time, they weren't sure he would make it. Keanu's single quotes as heart pounded as he drove through the rain, the city lights blurring past. Sandra sat beside him in silence, her hands clasped tightly together. "He's not going to die," she whispered over and over again. "He's not." But deep down, neither of them knew if that was true. And as they rushed toward the hospital, one thought burned in their minds: If this was Liam's final battle, they would make sure he didn't fight it alone. When hope hangs by a thread, the rain was relentless that night, hammering against the windshield as Keanu's car raced through the empty streets. Sandra stared out the window, her mind spinning with 1,000 fears she couldn't control. Hospitals had always made her uneasy, but tonight, they terrified her. Tonight, it wasn't just another visit. Tonight, it might be goodbye by the time they reached St. Mary's. The world felt like it was holding its breath. The halls were quieter than usual, the faces of the nurses more serious. The familiar hum of machines, the soft voices of doctors, everything seemed heavier. And then they saw Maria, Liam's mother, sitting outside the intensive care unit, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her body hunched like she was holding herself together with sheer will. "Maria," Sandra said gently, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" "The infection spread," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "His body's so weak. They're doing everything they can, but they don't know if he'll make it through the night." The words hit Sandra like a blow to the chest. She swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "Can we see him?" Keanu asked quietly. Maria nodded. "They said it's okay. For now." Room 217 didn't look the same anymore. The cheerful balloons were gone. The toys and carts had been moved aside. In their place were machines, more than ever before, blinking, beeping, keeping Liam alive when his body couldn't do it on its own. His skin was pale, almost translucent. Every breath was a battle, every movement a struggle. And yet, even in this fragile state, there was something unmistakable about him. A quiet strength that refused to surrender. Sandra walked to his bedside and gently held his hand. It was cold. Too cold. "Hey, little man," she whispered, forcing a smile. "We're here. We're not going anywhere." Keanu sat on the other side of the bed, leaning forward until his face was level with Liam's. "You remember what we talked about?" he said softly. "Heroes. How they don't stop fighting, even when it's hard." Liam's eyes didn't open, but his fingers twitched slightly in response. "This is your dragon, kid," Keanu continued, his voice steady but tender. "And you've already beaten bigger ones. Don't stop now." Hours passed. The night stretched on endlessly. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting medications. Doctors spoke in low voices just outside the door. Time blurred. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Sandra and Keanu stayed. They didn't move. They didn't sleep. They just held his hands, talked to him, reminded him over and over that he was loved. "Do you think he can hear us?" Sandra asked sometime around 3 a.m., her voice breaking. "I think he can," Keanu replied. "I think a part of him is fighting because he knows we're here. What if it's not enough? Then we'll fight harder." Tears streamed down her face. "He's just a child. He doesn't deserve this." "No one does," Keanu said quietly. "But if I've learned anything in my life, it's that the people who suffer the most often end up teaching the world the most important lessons." "Like what?" "Like what it really means to be strong." Just before dawn, a doctor entered the room. His expression was unreadable. "He's holding on," he said, "but the next 12 hours are critical. If his body doesn't respond to the antibiotics, we may have to prepare for the worst." Prepare for the worst. The words echoed in Sandra's mind long after the doctor left. She stared at Liam's small frame, the rise and fall of his chest, and something inside her broke. "This isn't how it's supposed to end," she whispered. He was getting better. He was smiling. He had dreams. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "And those dreams are still real. Nothing can take them away. Not even this." But Sandra wasn't listening anymore. She leaned closer to Liam, tears falling freely now. "You told me you wanted to be a hero," she whispered. "But the truth is, you already are. You changed my life, Liam. You reminded me what kindness means. So please, please don't stop fighting." And for the first time in days, something changed. Liam's breathing steadied, just slightly. His heartbeat grew stronger. If only by a fraction. Maybe he couldn't hear her words. Or maybe he could. But somewhere inside that fragile body, the fight wasn't over. The morning came slowly, painting the hospital windows in pale gold. Doctors ran new tests. Nurses checked his vitals. And just before noon, there was a small miracle. His fever started to drop. "It's working," the doctor said, almost in disbelief. "The infection is responding. It's still early, but this is a good sign." Sandra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Keanu closed his eyes, whispering a quiet thank you under his breath. But they weren't out of danger yet. The next few days would decide everything. And even if Liam survived the infection, the battle with cancer was far from over still. For the first time in days, hope felt real again. A few days later, Liam opened his eyes. It happened slowly, a flutter of eyelashes, a small groan, and then, suddenly, two tired brown eyes blinking up at them. "Hey," Keanu said softly, smiling through tears. "Welcome back, hero." Liam's voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Did I win?" "Not yet," Sandra said, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "But you're still in the fight, and that's what matters." Liam tried to smile. "I dreamed. I was flying. You were," Keanu said. "And you still are." His eyes closed again, exhaustion overtaking him. But the difference was clear. He was awake. He was aware. And he was still fighting. In the days that followed, Liam grew stronger. His body healed from the infection, his appetite slowly returned, and his smile, that bright, unstoppable smile, came back. But something had changed in all of them. Maria no longer carried the same weight in her eyes. Sandra no longer saw the hospital as a place of sadness, but as a battlefield where courage was born. And Keanu, who had seen his share of darkness, felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Yet even as Liam's strength returned, the doctors delivered news that reminded them the road ahead was still uncertain. "The cancer isn't gone," the lead oncologist explained, "but he's responding better than we expected. If he continues like this, he could be eligible for a new clinical trial." "A trial?" Maria asked. "It's experimental," the doctor said, "and expensive. But it's his best shot at a long-term recovery." Sandra didn't hesitate. "We'll pay for it." Maria began. "No," she said firmly. "This isn't charity. This is a promise. We're not giving up on him." Keanu placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "None of us are." And so, they began the next chapter of the fight. Fundraising, paperwork, endless consultations. The process was long, complicated, and exhausting. But they did it together. And through it all, Liam never stopped believing. "I'm going to make a movie one day," he told Keanu one afternoon, his eyes sparkling with determination. "And you're going to be in it." Keanu laughed. "Only if you direct me." Deal. It was a small dream, but it was powerful. Because dreams, no matter how simple, have a way of keeping people alive. But just as hope began to bloom again, life reminded them it was never simple. A letter arrived in the mail, one that would change everything. It was from the hospital's board of directors. The trial Liam needed had limited spaces. Funding was tight, and despite his progress, he was not guaranteed a spot. "They're putting him on a waiting list," Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "A waiting list, like he's just a number." Sandra felt her heart sink. Keanu clenched his fists, anger rising. "They will change their minds," he said. "We'll do whatever it takes." And just like that, the fight that had once been about survival became something bigger, a fight against the system, a fight for a boy's future, a fight to prove that kindness could change even the coldest decisions. The battle was far from over, but they were ready, and this time, they weren't just fighting for Liam's life. They were fighting for his tomorrow. The promise they refused to break letter lay on the table like a heavy weight. No one wanted to touch. Maria stared at it with tear-stained eyes. Sandra paced the hospital hallway like she was searching for air. And Keanu sat silently in a corner, his jaw tight, his hands clasped so hard his knuckles had gone white. "A waiting list," Maria whispered again, almost in disbelief. "My son's life is on a waiting list." "It's not over," Keanu said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was fire in it, the kind of fire that only came when someone you loved was threatened. "We'll get him into that trial. I don't care what it takes." "How?" Sandra asked, stopping mid-step. "They're saying funding is limited. There are other children waiting too. It's not just about money." "Then we'll make it about something else," Keanu replied. "We'll make them see Liam. Not a name on a list, not a file. Him." The next morning, they met with the hospital board. It was a cold, formal room, polished table, leather chairs, framed degrees on the walls. The faces that looked back at them were polite, but distant, like people who had made too many impossible decisions and learned how to hide behind them. "We understand your frustration," one of the directors said gently, "but there are protocols, criteria. We have to make difficult choices based on medical priority." "Liam is a priority," Maria said, her voice trembling. "He's responding to treatment. He's stronger every day. He deserves a chance, and we're not asking for charity," Sandra added. "We'll cover the costs if necessary." All of them, the board exchanged uneasy glances. "It's not just financial," the chairman explained. "The trial has a limited number of spots. Some patients have rarer conditions or more aggressive forms of cancer. We have to allocate resources accordingly." Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady but intense. "With all due respect, this isn't just about medicine. This is about a boy who's fighting with everything he has. A boy who believed he had no future until people reminded him he was worth fighting for. If you're going to make a decision about his life, at least have the decency to see the life you're deciding on." There was silence. No one spoke, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the words had done nothing. But then one of the board members, a woman who had been quiet until now, spoke. "There's an appeals process," she said slowly. "It's rarely successful, but it exists. If you submit new evidence, medical progress, personal circumstances, community support, we can review his case again." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a door, and they were ready to break it open. The days that followed became a whirlwind. Sandra used her platform to start a campaign, not for publicity, but for purpose. She told Liam's story in interviews, shared his journey online, spoke about the power of kindness and resilience. The world responded. Messages poured in from every corner of the globe, from parents whose children were fighting the same battle, from survivors who had once been in Liam's shoes, from strangers moved by the story of a boy who refused to give up. Donations flooded in, letters of support stacked higher by the day. And through it all, Liam, small, frail, but stubborn as ever, kept fighting. "Look," he said one afternoon, holding up a drawing he had made. It was a picture of him holding hands with Sandra and Keanu, standing in front of a movie camera. Above them, in shaky, childish handwriting, were the words, "The Heroes." Keanu smiled through the ache in his chest. "I think you missed someone." "Who?" Liam asked, confused. "You," Keanu said gently. "You're the biggest hero of us all." Liam giggled. "Heroes don't cry." "Then I guess I'm not a hero," Keanu replied, wiping a tear from his cheek. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. They walked into the same boardroom, but this time they weren't alone. Maria carried a folder full of medical reports showing Liam's progress. Sandra brought letters from doctors, teachers, and supporters. Keanu brought a short video, a simple, heartfelt message from Liam himself. In the video, his voice was quiet but clear. "My name is Liam," he said. "I'm 8. I love movies and superheroes and drawing. I want to be a director when I grow up. I know I'm sick, but I'm trying to be brave. I want a chance to make stories that make people happy. I want a chance to live." By the time the video ended, the room was silent. Several board members wiped away tears. "We'll review the case," the chairman said softly. "We'll notify you of our decision as soon as possible." And then, there was nothing left to do but wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour felt like a day, every day like a month. Maria prayed. Sandra distracted herself with work she couldn't focus on. Keanu spent long hours at the hospital, sitting by Liam's bed, telling him stories about film sets and faraway places. And then, one afternoon, the phone rang. Maria answered. Her face went pale. Then, slowly, it broke into a smile so wide it trembled. "He's in," she whispered. They accepted the appeal. "Liam's getting the trial," Sandra cried. Keanu closed his eyes and exhaled. For the first time in weeks, relief washed over them like sunlight breaking through clouds. But the battle wasn't over. The trial was risky. The side effects could be severe. And even if it worked, there were no guarantees. But now, at least, Liam had a chance. And that was more than they'd had before. The treatment began 2 weeks later. It was intense, harsher than anything Liam had gone through before. Some days he was too weak to speak. Other days he was in pain so strong he could barely stay awake. But he never complained. "Am I still a hero?" he asked one night, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the bravest person I know," Sandra said softly, "even more than John Wick." He asked with a small smile. "Way more," Keanu said, squeezing his hand. Through every setback, every difficult moment, they stayed by his side. They read to him, played games with him, told him stories when he couldn't sleep. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his body began to respond. His blood counts improved. The tumor markers decreased. The doctors, who had once spoken in cautious tones, started using words like promising and progress, and then, one crisp autumn morning, the lead oncologist walked into the room with tears in his eyes. "It's working," he said. "The treatment is working." The news spread like wildfire. Nurses hugged each other. Doctors smiled. Maria collapsed into Sandra's arms, sobbing with joy, and Keanu, the man who had been the steady rock through every storm, turned away quietly to wipe the tears that slipped down his face. But even in that moment of triumph, they knew the journey wasn't over. The treatment would continue for months. There would be setbacks and scares, but Liam was winning. One day, one breath, one heartbeat at a time, and as they sat together by his bedside that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and orange, Liam spoke words that would stay with them forever. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me. We never will," Sandra said, "and when I grow up," Liam added with a sleepy smile, "I'm going to make a movie about all of this, and you'll both be in it." Keanu chuckled. "Then you better write us some good parts." "The best," Liam murmured, drifting into sleep. But life, as it always does, had one more twist in store. Just as Liam's body was responding to treatment, a new complication emerged, something the doctors hadn't anticipated. A rare side effect of the therapy began to affect his heart. It wasn't severe yet, but it could become dangerous if not treated immediately. And once again, the question hung heavy in the air. Could Liam's small, brave heart endure one more battle? The heart that refused to stop. Words felt like ice when the doctor spoke them. "His heart is showing signs of stress," he said gently, glancing from Maria to Sandra to Keanu. "It's a rare complication of the treatment. We caught it early, but if it progresses, it could become life-threatening." The room went silent. Only the steady hum of machines and the distant footsteps in the hallway filled the space. Maria's hand shook as she covered her mouth. Sandra stared at the floor, her mind spinning with questions. Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face unreadable, but his jaw clenched tight. "What do we do?" Sandra asked finally. "We monitor closely," the doctor explained. "We might need to stop the treatment temporarily to give his heart a chance to recover. But pausing therapy carries its own risks. The cancer could start growing again. It's a delicate balance, and if we don't stop," Keanu asked, "then we risk his heart failing. Two impossible choices. Keep fighting the cancer and risk his heart, or protect his heart and risk the cancer coming back stronger." There was no right answer. There was only fear. The following days were filled with agonizing decisions. Meetings with specialists, late-night discussions, second and third opinions. Every doctor had a different recommendation. Every chart painted a different picture. Maria was breaking. She had spent months being strong, months holding on to faith, but this was too much. "I don't know what to do," she whispered one night in the hospital corridor, her voice cracking. "How do I choose between my son's heart and his life?" "You don't have to choose," Keanu said gently. "We'll find a way to protect both." "But what if there isn't a way?" "Then we make one," he said simply. "We fight harder. We get creative. We talk to every expert in the world if we have to. We don't stop now, not after how far he's come." Sandra placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "We promised Liam we wouldn't give up on him. We're going to keep that promise." And so they did. They called specialists across the country. They arranged video calls with doctors in Europe, Asia, Australia. They researched new therapies, alternative protocols, innovative treatments still in clinical testing. Every night, they returned to Liam's room with new information, new possibilities, new hope. And through it all, Liam, fragile but determined, kept fighting. "Am I in trouble?" he asked one morning, his small voice weak but curious. "No, buddy," Keanu said, sitting beside him. "You're just as strong. The treatment's having a hard time keeping up with you." Liam giggled softly. "Maybe I'm stronger than the medicine. Maybe you are," Sandra said, smiling even through her worry. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the hospital room in soft gold, Keanu pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "What's that?" Liam asked. "A plan," Keanu said. "I wrote down everything we're going to do when you're better." Liam's eyes widened. "Like what?" "First," Keanu said, flipping the page, "we're going to the ocean. You'll put your feet in the water, and we'll build the biggest sandcastle ever." Liam grinned. "And then we'll go to a movie premiere, your movie, and you'll walk the red carpet as the youngest director in Hollywood." Liam's smile faded slightly. "What if I don't get better?" Keanu paused, his heart breaking a little at the question. Then he leaned closer and took Liam's hand. Then I'll still be here, he said. I'll still be your friend. I'll still believe in you. Because being a hero isn't about living forever. It's about how much heart you have while you're here. And you, Liam, you have more heart than anyone I know. Liam's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Me too, Keanu admitted. But we'll be scared together. A week later, after endless consultations and sleepless nights, the doctors presented a plan. A carefully balanced treatment schedule that would continue targeting the cancer while protecting Liam's heart. It was risky and untested, but it was their best chance. There's no guarantee, the doctor warned, but it gives him a fighting shot. Do it, Maria said without hesitation. And so, the next phase of the battle began. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest yet. Liam's body struggled to adapt to the new schedule. Some days were good, full of smiles, small victories, laughter. Others were brutal, long nights of pain, exhaustion, and fear. But no matter how hard it got, he never stopped trying. How's the heart? Keanu would ask every morning. Still beating. Liam would reply with a wink. And every time he said those two words, they felt like a victory. One night, when the ward was quiet and the only sound was the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, Liam woke up suddenly. Sandra, who had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, stirred at the sound. Sandra, he whispered. She sat up immediately. What is it, sweetheart? If I don't make it, he said softly, promise me you'll still make the movie. Tears filled her eyes. Liam, promise me, he insisted, his small hand gripping hers. I promise, she whispered. But you're going to make it, and you're going to direct it yourself. Liam smiled faintly and closed his eyes again. But the conversation lingered in her mind long after he drifted back to sleep. A few days later, a miracle happened. Liam's heart readings began to improve. The stress markers dropped. His blood pressure stabilized. His energy returned, slowly but steadily. Doctors who had once spoken in careful, measured tones began using words like encouraging and remarkable. The cancer was shrinking. His heart was holding strong. Against all odds, Liam was winning. You're doing it, Keanu said one afternoon, his voice filled with pride. You're beating this, Liam grinned. Told you I was stronger than the medicine, and for the first time since the battle began, the room was filled with something that felt like more than hope. It felt like victory, but just when it seemed like the worst was behind them. Fate threw one final test their way. One cold winter night, just days before Liam was scheduled for his final treatment session, a storm knocked out power across the city. The hospital's backup generators kicked in, all except one. The one controlling the intensive care unit. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Machines shut down. And in the chaos, Liam's monitors went dark. We're losing power to the ventilator. A nurse shouted. We need to move him, now. Keanu and Sandra were pushed aside as doctors and nurses flooded the room, working frantically to stabilize him. The hallway filled with panic, the air heavy with fear, and as Keanu stood helplessly in the corner, watching the boy who had taught him more about courage than anyone else fight for his life. One last time, one thought echoed in his mind. Please, not now, not when he's so close. The heartbeat that changed everything. The hallway outside the intensive care unit was chaos. Alarms screamed, nurses shouted orders, doctors rushed in and out with grim faces. The storm had knocked out power across the entire city, and though the hospital's emergency generators had come online, the one connected to Liam's life support system had failed. Keanu stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see through the glass window. The machines around Liam's bed were dark, the monitors blank. Nurses worked quickly to connect portable ventilators and hand pump oxygen into his small lungs. Sandra clutched Maria's shaking hands, whispering prayers under her breath. Please, please, not now. Maria whispered, her voice cracking. Not when he's so close. They'll fix it, Keanu said, trying to sound steady, even though his voice trembled. They'll fix it. They have to. But deep down, fear gnawed at him. They had come so far, survived every obstacle, fought every battle, and now, at the very edge of victory, fate was threatening to take it all away. Inside the room, doctors worked with urgent precision. One team focused on getting the ventilator restarted manually. Another worked on connecting a portable power source. And a third monitored Liam's vital signs, which were dropping fast. Come on, come on, one of the nurses muttered under her breath, pumping oxygen with her hands. Stay with us, buddy. Stay with us. Liam's heart rate dipped. The monitor, running on battery backup, showed the numbers falling. 80, 70, 60. We're losing him. A doctor shouted, manual compressions, now. Sandra felt her knees buckle. Maria screamed. Keanu's hands tightened into fists. Double quotes, no. He whispered, no, not like this. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. He had always believed in fate, believed that some things were written long before they happened. But not this, not now. Not after everything this little boy had fought for. So he did the only thing he could. He spoke, not to the doctors, not to the nurses, but to Liam. You hear me, kid? He whispered, his voice breaking. You don't stop now. You've come too far. You've beaten everything they said you couldn't. You are the bravest person I've ever met. And if there's any fight left in you, any at all, now's the time to use it. Inside the room, the doctors continued compressions. One nurse shouted for more oxygen. Another scrambled to restart the generator. And then, just as the heart monitor flatlined, a small blip appeared. Beep. Another beep. Beep. We have a pulse. A doctor shouted. Keep going. The room exploded into motion again. Within minutes, the portable power supply was connected. The ventilator roared back to life, and the steady beeping of Liam's heartbeat filled the room once more. Outside, Sandra collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Maria fell to her knees, whispering thank you over and over again. Keanu closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath he'd been holding for what felt like an eternity. He was alive, still fighting, still here. Hours passed before a doctor emerged from the ICU. His face, though tired, carried the faintest hint of a smile. He's stable, he said. It was close, closer than we'd like, but he's stable. His heart is strong, and the treatment is still working. If there are no further complications, he's going to make it. Maria broke down in tears. Sandra hugged her tightly. Keanu just stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor, trying to absorb the weight of what he had just heard. He's going to make it. 3 words that felt heavier, more beautiful, and more miraculous than anything he had ever heard. The days that followed were a slow climb back toward hope. Liam's condition stabilized. His vitals grew stronger. The treatment continued without further complications. And then, one morning, as the winter sun spilled gently into room 217, Liam opened his eyes. Hey, he whispered weakly, his voice raspy from the ventilator. Did I miss anything? Sandra laughed through her tears. Just a small storm. Nothing important. Keanu leaned over the bed, his eyes glistening. You scared us, kid. Sorry, Liam said with a tired smile. I was just resting. Well, next time, warn us first, Keanu joked, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. Did we win? Liam asked. You're still here, Sandra said softly. So yeah, we won. Weeks turned into months. The trial continued. The cancer continued to shrink. The doctor's updates became more optimistic with each passing day. And finally, one bright spring afternoon, they gathered in Liam's room to deliver the news they had all been praying for. The scans are clear, the oncologist said with a wide smile. The cancer is gone. For a moment, no one moved. The words didn't seem real. Then Maria screamed with joy and threw her arms around Sandra. Nurses cheered in the hallway. Keanu stood frozen, tears slipping silently down his face. Liam blinked up at them, confusion on his face. Does that mean I get to go home? It means, Keanu said, his voice shaking, you get to do everything you ever dreamed of. The months that followed were some of the happiest any of them had ever known. Liam went home. He grew stronger. He returned to school, made new friends, and started writing scripts for the movies he wanted to make one day. True to his promise, he wrote one story above all others, the story of a boy who fought impossible odds, of the people who never gave up on him, and of the power of kindness that changed everything. And in the first scene of that story, he wrote a dedication to Sandra and Keanu, my real-life superheroes. 2 years later, a small independent film premiered at a modest theater in Los Angeles. The red carpet wasn't lined with flashing cameras or screaming fans. Instead, it was filled with doctors, nurses, patients, and families, people who knew firsthand the power of hope. The film was called Heartbeat, and at the premiere, an older, healthier Liam stood in front of the audience, holding a microphone with shaking hands. When I was 8, he said, I thought heroes weren't real. I thought no one could save me, but I was wrong. Heroes are real. They don't wear capes or have powers. They're people who stay, people who fight, people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. He turned to Keanu and Sandra, sitting side by side in the front row. Thank you, he whispered, for saving me. Keanu wiped a tear from his cheek. Sandra smiled through her tears, and when the lights dimmed and the film began, they held hands, silent, humble, grateful, knowing that they had been part of something far bigger than themselves. Years would pass, but the story of Liam, the boy who refused to give up, the boy who taught to adults the meaning of courage, would never fade. Because in a world that often felt cold and cruel, he was proof that kindness could save lives, that hope could rewrite destiny, that love, pure, selfless, unconditional love, was the greatest medicine of all. And it had all started with a simple visit to a hospital. One child, one act of kindness, one heartbeat that refused to stop.